Hello, everyone. This is Philip Carian from the Family Room, and thank you for joining us on this webinar entitled The Death of the Tiger Mom. I mean, we selected a provocative title because it is rare when we see a dramatic shift in parenting models, but that's what we have actually witnessed or seen in our last wave. This has been happening for a while, but pandemics have a way of revealing and accelerating changes that have gone unnoticed. George, our CEO and founder, will take you through what we are seeing and what it might mean for marketers like you. And as always, if you have any questions, please send them through using your question app on the dashboard on the platform here, and we'll try to get to as many of those questions before the end of the webinar. George?
Thanks, Philip, and thanks everyone for joining. It's great to have you here. We have a nice, great, large turnout today, so hopefully there's interest in, and there'll be usefulness in what we're about to share with you. Like Philip said, there's been a lot of talk these days about inflection points and transformational moments, and most of those have been sort of in the context of COVID. And God knows if you don't need me to reinforce all the ways that COVID has transformed various aspects of your world. But this is a trend which actually is not induced by COVID. It was accelerated by COVID, but this is a trend which began many years before, several years before COVID began, and it shows no signs of slowing down. And as a consequence, not only is it important in itself, but it appears to be one of those trends which is a long-term ascent and therefore kind of gets us out of the worry about is this a temporary aberration or a short-term a change that'll go back to normal very, very shortly. So it's going to, I think we think this is going to impact, this idea of death of the tiger mom is going to impact every aspect of consumer product and media for the family space. And the other thing that's interesting about this, in addition to not being COVID triggered, is that it seems to us anyway, that this is a trend which is good news for the world. One of the things that I think we've all had to live with is just more and more bad news about consumers and humans that we're trying to market to. But there have been some silver linings of COVID, and this we think is one of them. Of course, that's a bit more judgment than fact. But the inflection point that we're talking about, as we spoke about here, is this surging awareness of moms and dads' needs in and of themselves. That moms and dads were put on this earth to do more than just raise kids, and that every consumer choice that they make does not need to be seen by them as this testament to their commitment to their kids, but a commitment to themselves. So we've kind of gotten into this whole idea of thinking about the death of the tiger or even the helicopter parent. And we've been studying this cohort for almost 20 years. And we've been seeing a lot of these kind of helicopter tiger parent characteristics kind of go from insignificant to extremely significant over the last 15 years. We are now living in a country, or we were up until several years ago, where almost 3 in 4 parents consider their 8-year-old to be their best friend. And the great majority of moms and dads were really focused almost exclusively on their kids' success, as opposed to at the bottom of this list here, their success. Their career got 18% kind of passion point prioritization. Their kids' success got 81%. And on top of that, we had 75% prioritizing being closer to my child as their top emotional priority. So this is a population of parents which has always, at least for the last 5 to 8 years, been very, very focused on their child to the point of ignoring their own individual needs. So that is coming to an end. One of the remarkable things about this work we're doing in the passion point space is we can see how these trends move over a 10-year time horizon. And what is coming online in place of these helicopter parents or these tiger parents are what we're calling me love parents. Parents that take their own needs very seriously. So I'm going to begin this by kind of talking a little bit about what a me love parent is. As many of you know, that we as a company focus a lot of our energy and resources on this thing called Passion Points. This is a self-funded proprietary study on the emotional drivers of consumers' decision making. It is one of the largest trackers of consumer sentiment in the world. We measure 50 passion point statements. We group them into 5 factors, which are rooted in academic theory. We're able to look at both intensity and velocity, and what that means. We can look at how important these are at any given point in time, as well as how they're changing over time. And we have these 4 generational models. So we can look at this at a human level, at a category level, and at a brand level. And we have had a number of great subscriptions with numerous people in the family space as well as beyond. Again, this is not just families, but today's conversation is about families. So with that as a setup, let me kind of give you some headline findings about these remarkable shifts and these core values that define moms and dads. And I'll begin with some changes at a high level of these passion points, and then I'll get into more specific granular explanations of what each one of these things mean. But one of the things that we track, again, is a simplified set of roll-ups for each of these passion points. And here are 3 of them that really speak to this idea of me love parents. So you can see this data begins in 2018, not 2020, 2018. And we're going to be looking at 3 of these different emotional factors. The first one's belonging and love. That's where all the things that moms and dads had to do with their kids, the love for their kids, education for their kids, happiness for their kids, all of those live in belonging and love. And then beneath that, you'll see one called personal significance. That's my needs as a human being to feel significant and important in the world. And then there's self-actualization, which speaks more to some of the spiritual and aspirational aspects of life. And what you can see here on the right-hand side is a remarkable increase in what we call me love, those passion points around significance and self-actualization, and a moderate decline, not a huge one, but a moderate decline in belonging and love, the love for my children. Now, I want to state now, and I'll repeat it throughout this conversation, that we are not here to say that parents have stopped loving or caring for their kids. They haven't. This remains their top emotional priority, as you can see from the right-hand side of this chart. But those little dots on the right-hand side are getting very close together, much closer together than they were in 2018. And when you look inside of each one of these factors to understand, well, what does that mean? Like when you say significance, what are we talking about, and how much are some of these parent priorities shifting? I'll share a couple of other data points on the next slide to give you an idea of just how significant this is. So in the world of significance, there are passion points that are defined as my hobbies and personal passions, my career, my sort of self-advocacy, my sense of self-belief and self-love. Look how fast these are going up. Massive, massive increases over the last 3 years. And when we sort of get over into the world of self-actualization, things like my concern about the climate, things beyond myself, but kind of related to my world and things beyond my individual ecosystem, like climate change, or getting involved in a cause that I care about, or my spirituality, the recognition that there are forces in the world larger than my own, and that I need to pay attention to those and perhaps worship those. Being true to who I am, reaching my personal goals. All of these things are shooting upwards over the last 4 years. Now, they accelerated during COVID, but they began a long time before COVID. And when we look into that other factor, that area of belonging and love, there's some really interesting decreases. Okay, so this is just, we'll give you a quick idea on the left-hand side. Don't expect you to read this table. There's too much data on it. But all of these emotional priorities related to my kid are going down, significantly going down. And to give you a bit more kind of detail on this, here are some of the passion points in belonging and love about kid connections, making sure my child feels loved, going down at a 178 velocity index, making sure my child feels comfortable talking to me, making memories together, being present with my family, down, 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 and down. Okay, let's now look at beyond kid connections. Let's take a look at health, the health of my child, both the emotional health as well as the physical health. Happiness, self-love, self-esteem, optimism, just letting my kids be kids, all down. And then finally, let's take another final look here at education. Many of you all are on this webinar in the kids media space, and obviously you're thinking a lot about educational content. Well, here's where those rank as human priorities for parents over the last 4 years. Character, curricular learning, strengths and passions, self-care, grit and determination, all down. So you can see why we're kind of ringing the bell, I hope, about this. These are not small changes. These are very, very significant changes. Now, again, I'm going to say this over and over again. If you look at the top 10, forget about factors, look at the top 10 passion points out of the 80 that we track for parents, they're all about their kid. They're still all about their kid. So again, don't misunderstand me in suggesting that parents have become, neglectful or sort of placing their own needs above those of their kids, because they aren't. But you can also see that every single one of those top child rearing passion points is on the way down. It's a priority. And what's going up is significance, personal significance, and personal self-actualization. So if you're like us, you're probably wondering, why is this happening? Like, what is it about 3 or 4 years ago that caused this incredibly important shift to begin to take place in what is, without question, the world's most valuable consumer? Parents spend a lot more money on everything: cars, groceries, vacations, media, phones. This is the definitive super consumer. Like, what happened? and of course, the next question is going to be, how is that impacting categories, which I'll get to in a minute. But we've got 3 hypotheses. I'd be thrilled if some of you all have other theories on this. Put them into the chat, because it'd be great to talk about it at the end of the session. But here are our 3, actually not hypotheses. Some of this is based in data from our Passion Point study. So the first hypothesis on why the Me Love is on the rise is the fact that we are now welcoming a lot of millennials into the ranks of parenting. The parenthood is being defined by a greater and greater percentage of millennials. And they are bringing their well-known, well-defined love for Me Love with them as parents. So this is the same first chart that I showed you, but in this case, it's just cut against millennial parents. And here you can see those lines are at the right-hand side are almost touching. For all parents, they're pretty still somewhat far apart, although coming together rapidly. For millennial parents, significance and self-actualization have become almost as important an emotional priority as belonging and love and all those kid-related child-rearing passion points. So that clearly is one element. There is generational change happening in parenthood, and with that is coming a fundamentally different set of child-rearing values. There's one explanation. I think another explanation certainly has to do with the composition of families. One of the things that I think we kind of need to keep track of is that who is actually in these households, who is actually raising these kids, is not the biological parents for the most part. It is a really interesting and rapidly expanding hodgepodge of different adult figures in different numbers with different kinds of relationships with the kid doing the child rearing. So, you can see that nuclear families is around 40%, of kids are being raised by both their biological moms and dads. But then you've got remarried or unmarried parents. And a great stat, which I find really important, is that last year there were more second marriages in the US than first marriages. And those kinds of parents, there's nothing wrong with them. There's absolutely no judgment when I say this, but it is a different relationship if the child is not your biological kid. It is. Then there's single parents, lots of single parents that have very different kinds of recognition and sort of needs as individuals as well as parents. Then there's same gender or same sex families. And then there's the grandparent households. So, this is not the Cleavers, obviously, not the Waltons. We're in a completely different time in terms of what this composition of these households look like. And the people who are doing the child rearing, whether they are the biological parents or some other loving adult figure in the kids' lives, it's just different. And they're not willing to sort of completely park their own needs at the door to make sure that everything their kids wants at that instant is being met. And then, of course, the last piece is the obvious piece, which is COVID. Now, it was hard. It was 12 months of real challenge for parents as they assumed the role of breadwinner, housekeeper, groundskeeper, educator, teacher, therapist, all of these things suddenly fell into moms and dads' lap. But again, this is 3 years into it that we began seeing this trend, and that COVID took place. So it is certainly one which began well before, and again, as far as we're able to see, is going to last well after. So, of course, that brings us to the final kind of part of this conversation, and just some initial thoughts from us on well, what does this mean? Like, I sell breakfast cereal. I'm in the kid content business. I'm in family vacations. Like, what do what does this mean? How am I supposed to respond to this? So, again, the cool thing about our work is that in addition to studying these human values, which is what all the data I've just shown you is, this is a human level understanding of parents. We also track which of these different emotional values are manifesting at a category level. Where do we see some of these passion points moving and shifting when parents are asked to think about vacations or snacks or family content or any of the other 10 categories that we track? And one of the things that you're going to see in a minute is that one flows right through to the other. It's not like, oh, well, that's a human value. I'll never see that in my world of breakfast cereal. Oh, yes, you will. Parents look for relief from these emotional stress points wherever they can get it. And if you're a breakfast cereal, a beverage, a vacation destination that can satisfy that emotional itch or that emotional need or that tension, great, I'm in. So let me just show you a teeny little preview of 3 categories in which we're beginning to see this me love thing take place, and what we think are some of the implications of this for brand building and relevance driving as you go forward. I mean, we all want to build our brand, we want to be relevant. So here are 3 thoughts on that. Let's begin with content. I think one of the kind of beliefs in the world of content is that a great library of kid content is a great draw for families. No, it's not. Not anymore. It's not. There are people like Paramount Plus have this incredible repository of kid content, and I think that's very much a part of their kind of strategic plan for attracting families. Well, it might attract kids, but kids aren't going to cough up $10 a month to pay for Paramount Plus. And if the moms and dads don't see something in it for them also, it's going to be a much harder choice to make that expenditure. And maybe the platforms that are able to actually deliver shared content that everybody gets something out of, especially the parents, like Discovery Plus, with their Food Channel, Food Network. That's we love. That's the kind of sort of, where all of our needs are important. Let's watch a cooking show together as opposed to the SpongeBob movie together. So whether it be in content strategy, production, marketing and messaging, you think a lot about what you're saying if you're trying to attract a family audience onto your platform, because it's not what it used to be. So the second category where there's some really interesting, here you go, that my happiness is one of these my happiness is one of these trending passion points in the family content category from our study. The next one is restaurants. Interestingly enough, within the world of food and restaurants, more and more parents are more and more concerned about global responsibility, climate responsibility for a restaurant. This is a climbing, trending passion point in the restaurant space. And I think that the thing that people in this category need to sort of think really hard about is, what do I do with a parent who's less willing to follow their kid into a restaurant for a Happy Meal? Because that is and has been the family strategy in this industry for the last 20 years. Get the kid in with a prize or a toy in the box, and the parents will kind of suffer through food they may not want to eat, but you know what, that's too bad because the kid's needs come first. Not anymore. Not anymore. So whether it's, thinking about the Happy Meal and, celebrating your commitment as a brand to the environment, or the Happy Meal and the incredible coffees that you have. You might have thought of coffees as the thing for young adults. Maybe not. Maybe that's what makes parents feel good about coming to this restaurant as opposed to only the Happy Meal. You're going to have to think about family traffic building and family recruitment through a very different lens than the industry has in the past if you want to be relevant going forward. And then the last one I just thought I would mention here very briefly is vacations, where we're seeing really interesting connections to a parent's desire for their personal emotional well-being. So I think we're going to see parents a lot less willing to spend their precious vacation time indulging their kids without indulging themselves as well. I'm not, God knows people are going to go to Disneyland no matter what, and that's not going to sort of suddenly die on the vine. But I think that parents are a lot less willing to shove themselves into a kid roller coaster, and go up and down and get a little nauseous in the process without some kind of emotional reward for themselves. Or maybe have some kind of a destination in and of themselves that really works for everybody, as opposed to I'm doing this for my kid. So those are just 3 examples. We can see this across all 10 of the categories that we track. We see this absolutely in the most relevant brands in each one of these categories. You can clearly see how the brands that have the highest emotional relevance scores, which we also track, are the ones that are reflecting their needs as people. They're meeting these families where they are, meeting these parents where they are. And where they are is my needs matter too. So I'll leave you with that. I think that there's going to need to be a fundamental rethink and a fundamental rebalancing in kid and family brand building, and especially in the world of family media and leisure space, entertainment space, because we are seeing a new generation of parents dedicated to raising wonderful kids, but refusing to do so without tending to their own needs. As parents, they still are kid focused, they're still attentive, they're still loving, they still are looking for those family moments. None of that's going away. But they have learned that they've got to put their own oxygen mask on first before assisting the needs of others. The times are tough, and they cannot be a good parent. They cannot love their kids the way they want to love their kids without loving themselves also. So I invite you to think about that and ask yourselves, to what extent are you reflecting those values in how you're building your family brand or your parent brand in any case. And if you want more help with that, of course, we'd be happy to speak to you further. We have lots and lots of more information on this, which would be a pleasure to share. But with that, let me pause and see if there are any questions, and I hope you found that useful.
Hey, George. It's Philip. There are a few questions that have popped in, and please, if there are others, send them our way. There was one about whether or not this data was very US focused, or are we seeing this globally as well?
Yeah, it's a good question. We do this work in 8 countries around the world. And yes, it's not universally global, but it is the majority of the countries that we are doing this work in. Yes, we are seeing it. We're seeing it in Latin America, big time. We are seeing it in Europe, big time. A little more spotty in Asia. But I think that this has been, the whole kind of focus on kids' happiness has been a global phenomenon for the prior 15 years. And kind of the ricochet slingshot response is appearing to be a global phenomenon also.
And I guess a question and maybe a hypothesis about is this a reaction to how this generation was raised as children themselves?
Yeah, that's a great, Philip, I know you've got thoughts on that. Maybe you could jump in with.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've done quite a bit of qual with millennial parents about their own attitudes about this was particularly regarding food, and in many instances they talked about how their own parents would either suffer through meals of chicken nuggets or whatever, or have them eat something completely different from what they were, and as millennial parents, this is one of the things I want to do is I want to make sure my child enjoys some of the same foods I do, so that we can both share it, and I don't have to eat kiddie's food, and I can expand their palate. But it may have been a reaction to how they were raised. I think it's also a fact that at a young age they were exposed to a lot of different stimulus as well, but they clearly are coming into this with a different attitude to what being a parent is, and don't want that sense of children will be children, and adults have to enjoy what they have to just to follow the kid. There's a question about, you said there, but what other categories are we seeing it in? I think it may be interested in seeing if there are other categories that.
Yeah, well, there's three that are particularly evident, and they're in the food space: snacks, beverages, and breakfasts. We've been seeing, again, in all of these categories, emotionally, prior to this trend emerging, a movement towards making sure my kids are consulted, making sure my kids are pleased, even in center of the plate occasions like breakfast. And in every one of those categories, there's a number of different emotional indicators that are suggesting that this is going to be returned to a much more balanced family-centric approach. And I think Philip said it well. There was a time, and there were brands that grew based on the belief that parents would happily eat chicken nuggets. If that's what their kids wanted, they would too. Or drink Kool-Aid as opposed to some other beverage. And again, that's just simply not appearing to be the future reality. We see it in gaming. That's another category. And we absolutely see it in family content. We look at both kid content, kid UGC, as well as family content. And interestingly, in kid content, there's less and less emotional interest among parents in kid shows that I can watch with my kid. Just, I'm not doing that anymore. And in the space of family content, there's more and more interest in content that, again, makes me happy and satisfies my needs, as opposed to just bonds us as a family.
And then the question about, whether we could talk a little bit more about these shared family moments and how they might be evolving greater focus, given the focus on self-love.
Yeah, again, for me, like the prototypical family, quote unquote, family moment 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, was the entire family eating or playing a game that the kid loved. Playing with Legos, for example. That's probably not a good example, because Legos is like the one example of a kid brand that still has huge family love. But it's a parent sort of doing something that's kid driven but parent accepted. And these new family moments are much more about. So here's an example. Like a few years ago, a family moment was the family having macaroni and cheese for dinner. Today, family moment is the family having tacos. Okay, the parent is not that psyched about eating macaroni and cheese, but 10 years ago they're like, yeah, whatever. My kid wants it, I'm going to go and eat it. Tacos is a food that everybody loves. Like, who doesn't like a taco? You can customize it. For the parents, it's a way of exposing their kids to some different flavor palettes. But there's something to delight everybody in a taco dinner, as opposed to a macaroni and cheese dinner. So maybe that's the most crisp example of that difference.
Now, one last question about what benefit do you think this will have on the next generation of kids? Will they be more independent or self-sufficient, or will it have a negative impact?
Well, I think that's to be determined. I mean, now we're into an opinion a little bit, but I will tell you that every marker of kids' emotional health that we track is plummeting right now. So a part of me thinks that this letting kids kind of be their own self-advocates a little bit more. I don't know if you all have read the book, The Blessing of the Skinned Knee. Letting kids fall every now and not being there to pick them up. Letting them skin their knee and learn from that and be resilient from that. I have to believe is a really good thing. I just wish that these kids were in a better ingoing state to absorb these lessons than they are right now.
All right, thank you, George, and thank you everyone for attending this webinar. Hopefully there was plenty of food for thought, and that you'll join us again on our next webinar. These were results that came back from our Q1 wave. We'll be getting ready to go back into our Q2 wave. So anybody who wants to join us and participate, please reach out to one of us. Our emails are on the page in front of you, or if you have any other additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you, and look forward to seeing you again soon.